The strange noise in the stable. Jake lived alone on a dry, quiet planet called Dustridge. His ranch was wide, empty, and far from other people. He liked it that way. There were no neighbors, no noise, and no one to bother him. Every day, he fed his animals, fixed fences, and watched the sky. His old stable was full of hay and dust, and he hadn't used it much in years. One night, as the sun disappeared and the sky turned dark orange, Jake sat near his house with a warm drink. A windstorm had started, blowing sand across the fields. The wind howled through the old wooden boards of the stable. Jake listened to it, calm and quiet, until he heard something strange. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't an animal either. It was a soft scratching. Then a small thud. Then silence again. Jake narrowed his eyes and stood up. He wasn't afraid, but he was curious. Maybe some wild animal got in. Maybe a thief. He grabbed a light and walked toward the stable. The wind pushed against him, and dust stung his eyes. When he opened the stable doors, nothing seemed wrong. But the scratching sound came again. This time it was closer. He aimed the light toward the corner. 2 eyes glowed in the darkness. Not yellow like a cat, not red like a machine. These were orange, soft but bright, and alive. He froze. The eyes blinked. Then another pair of eyes appeared next to them, smaller. Weaker. Jake stepped back, unsure what he was looking at. He had lived on this ranch for 10 years. He knew every creature that walked in the wild, but this was something else. Slowly, the figure stepped forward into the light. They looked like small dragons. One was a little bigger than a goat, the other small enough to carry. Their scales were smooth and green-blue, glowing softly in the dark. The bigger one had tiny horns and wings that were folded close to its body. The smaller one leaned against it, breathing hard. Jake didn't move. He just watched. Then something even stranger happened. The bigger one looked at him and spoke, not in growls, not in roars. "Please, don't call them. We are not dangerous." Jake didn't understand. He stepped closer. The creature continued, its voice shaky and soft. "We lost our parents. They were taken. We ran for days. We're tired. We're cold. Please don't let them find us. We just want a home." Jake dropped the light. It hit. The hay bounced, but didn't break. His heart was beating faster now. The smaller dragon was shaking, and its eyes were closing slowly. Jake looked at them, 2 small lives hiding in an old, dusty barn. They weren't trying to hurt anyone. They were scared. "Just kids. Who are you?" Jake asked, his voice quiet. The big one didn't answer that. It looked down at its sibling, then looked back up. "Will you let us stay? Just for the night?" Jake was a simple man. He didn't like surprises. But something about the way the creature spoke, it didn't feel fake. It felt real, honest, and he knew what it was like to feel alone. He had lost his wife 5 years ago. Since then, the ranch had been nothing but silence and wind. He looked around, then nodded slowly. "I don't know what's going on," he said, "but you can stay, just for tonight." The bigger dragon lowered its head in thanks. This small one rested on the straw, eyes finally closing. Jake backed away and closed the stable door, locking it from outside. He didn't sleep much that night. He kept thinking, who were they running from? Who could hurt creatures like that? The next morning, he brought them water and food. The big one thanked him. The small one was still weak. Then the question came, "Will you help us find a safe place?" The dragon asked. Jake didn't answer right away. His hands shook slightly. He knew his life was about to change, but he also knew he couldn't walk away. He couldn't leave them to die. That was the moment everything changed. He had been a lonely rancher. Now he had a reason to protect. And danger was coming. But Jake had already made his choice. Asterisk the silent chase in the sky over Dustridge was quiet again. But Jake could feel something had changed. The two alien dragons were still hiding in his stable. The little one, who was still too weak to speak, now slept better. The older one, who called herself Sorry, was always watching the sky. Her ears twitched at every sound, and her eyes glowed. Dimly at night. Jake didn't ask too many questions, but she gave him pieces of the truth. They were being hunted, not by animals. Not by humans, by something worse. She said the ones who killed her parents were called Seekers. Cold, cruel machines that followed heat and voice. They were not from this world, and they didn't care about life. They only wanted control. Sorry said she and her sibling were the last of their kind to escape. And they escaped by accident when their mother sent them through a jump pod just seconds before the ship exploded. Jake didn't understand everything, but he believed her. The fear in her voice wasn't fake. That night, Jake stepped outside to clear his mind. The stars above looked peaceful. But then he saw something move across the sky, 3 silver dots gliding without sound. No fire. Number. Smoke. Just a smooth, silent drift across the stars. He narrowed his eyes. They weren't meteors. They were ships. Jake rushed back to the stable and told Sorry. She froze. Her small claws dug into the dirt and her voice dropped low. They found this world? Jake asked how long they had until the ships landed. Sorry said not long. Maybe 1 or 2 nights. The Seekers didn't wait. Once they spotted a trail, they came fast. Jake looked around his dusty ranch. He had no weapons, no security system. He was just a man with fences, tools, and a stable. But he also had something no one expected. He told Sorry they wouldn't run. Not yet. The younger one couldn't move. There was no way they could survive the desert with her in that condition. They had to stay. And they had to hide. Jake started working the next morning. He blocked off the stable windows with metal sheets. He dug a trench behind the barn, just deep enough for the dragons to slip through if needed. He even placed fake heat sources around the fields, old heaters and lights powered by solar cells. He hoped the Seekers would chase the wrong signals. Sorry helped too. Though she was small, her claws were sharp. She carved patterns into wood to cover the stable scent. Jake didn't ask how it worked. It was alien magic to him. But he trusted her. Each night, they watched the sky together. More ships appeared, moving in strange paths. Jake began to hear low vibrations in the air like a hum. The Seekers were getting closer. One afternoon, Jake's animals began acting strange. The horses refused to eat. The birds stopped singing. Even the wind was still. Sorry said it meant the Seekers were near. That evening, a strange light passed through the sky and landed far in the desert. No fire, no sound, just a red beam that touched the ground and vanished. Jake's heart dropped. They weren't guessing anymore. They knew someone was here. Sorry told Jake something then that he hadn't heard before. She said her kind had a special power, one that connected them to other beings, a bond. Her people could link with hearts that were kind, strong, and full of truth. That was why the Seekers wanted to destroy them. The bond gave power, real power, not weapons, but something deeper, trust, connection, loyalty. She looked at Jake and said her sibling was starting to bond with him. Jake was silent. He didn't feel different. But when he looked at the smaller dragon, who now smiled when he entered the stable, he felt something inside him shift. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. He stood near the door with a flashlight in one hand and a hammer in the other. He watched the stars. Waiting. Then he saw it. One of the ships flew lower than before. It wasn't a dot now. It had shape long like a knife, silent, cold, searching. Jake woke the dragons and told them to be ready. He didn't know what he'd do if they came that night, but he'd stand between them and the stable. Even if it cost him everything, he never asked to be a hero. He never wanted war, but they came to his land. They brought fear to his home, and Jake wasn't going to run not tonight. When the youngest fell sick, the mornings had become colder. The wind no longer felt dry, but sharp, like it carried a warning. Jake noticed it first in the younger dragon. Her glow, once soft and warm, was now fading. Her eyes stayed shut longer each day. Her breathing grew slower. She didn't eat. She didn't move. And then, one morning, she didn't wake up right away. Jake knelt beside her, his hands trembling. He called for Sari. The older dragon rushed to her side and placed her claw gently on her sister's chest. She closed her eyes and listened. A faint light passed between them. When she opened her eyes, Jake saw fear in them. "She is sick," Sari whispered. "Very sick." Jake asked what they could do. Sari's voice cracked as she answered, "She needs skyroot. It's a plant from her homeworld, but there is one plant here that's close. It grows high on the cliff near your ranch. You call it fireleaf." Jake knew that place. It was dangerous. The cliff was steep, covered in loose rock, and the path was thin. He hadn't climbed it since his younger days. One wrong step could mean death. But he didn't hesitate. "Tell me what it looks like," Jake said. Sari described the fireleaf. Red leaves like flames, a thick purple stem. It only grew in cold shadows, high up near the top. Jake packed a small bag and left before the sun reached the sky. He didn't take a horse. He didn't want to draw attention. Every step he took toward the cliff, he remembered the dragon's weak face. He couldn't forget her eyes. She reminded him of his daughter, the one he lost long ago to sickness. He had no power then, but this time he could try. The climb was harder than he remembered. The rocks crumbled under his boots. His hands bled from grabbing sharp edges. Dust filled his nose and eyes. Twice he slipped and nearly fell. His body ached, but he didn't stop. Hours passed. At the edge of a narrow ledge, he saw it fireleaf, glowing red in the shadows. He pulled himself toward it, ignoring the pain. He reached out, grabbed a handful, and held it tight. Then the rock beneath him cracked. He fell. He didn't remember the fall, only the sharp pain when he hit the side and rolled. When he woke, his leg was cut and his arm bruised. But the fireleaf was still in his hand. He smiled through the pain. The walk back was slow. Night had already fallen. Lights flickered in the sky above. The seekers were still near, but Jake didn't care. He had something more important to do. Sari met him at the stable door. Her eyes widened when she saw the fireleaf. Jake handed it to her without a word and fell to the ground, breathing hard. Sari crushed the plant gently and placed it on her sister's chest. Then she began to hum a strange low sound that vibrated through the air. The younger dragon stirred. Her eyes opened, weak but alive. A soft light returned to her scales. Jake watched from the ground, his body shaking. He didn't know how much longer he could fight this battle. But in that moment, seeing her smile, he felt something deep inside him, hope. Sari came to his side and helped him sit up. "You didn't have to risk your life," she said. Jake smiled. "Yes, I did." That night, for the first time, the little dragon whispered his name, Jake, and he felt something stronger than pain, stronger than fear. He felt purpose. The wind outside still carried danger. The sky still held silent ships. But in the stable, a small life had been saved. A bond had grown stronger. And Jake, once just a lonely rancher, was no longer alone. He had a reason to fight, and he would keep fighting. They found us. Run. The warning came not with sound, but with silence. One morning the birds stopped flying over the fields. The wind vanished. Even the insects that usually buzzed near the barn were gone. Jake stood at the edge of his porch, staring at the sky, feeling the weight of the still air pressing on his chest. Something was wrong. Sari already knew. Her eyes were sharp and alert. Her wings twitched. She didn't speak at first. She only looked at her younger sister, who was finally able to stand again. The small dragon moved slowly but smiled, still weak from the sickness. That smile made Sari hesitate before finally telling Jake the truth. They're here. Jake's stomach dropped. He had feared this moment, but some part of him had hoped it would never come. Now it was real. Sari said the Seekers were no longer searching. They were moving in. Their scouts had locked onto the stable during the night. They were closing in fast, less than a day away. Jake didn't wait. He moved quickly, grabbing the emergency supplies he had prepared just in case this moment came. Water, food, blankets, a small flare launcher. It wasn't much, but it was enough to survive in the desert for a while. He opened the back of the stable and pulled aside an old wooden panel, revealing a tunnel. He had dug it over the past week, just in case. It led into the hills, far enough to escape detection if they moved fast. Sari helped her sister into the tunnel. The little dragon looked back at the stable, her glowing eyes filled with sadness. This had become her home. But now they had to leave it behind. Jake took one last look around. His land, his ranch, his peace, it was all going to be lost. Not because of anything he did, but because he chose to care. And still, he didn't regret it. As they entered the tunnel, the sky behind them lit up. A red beam shot down from above and hit the ground where the stable stood. The earth shook. Dust rained down from the ceiling. Jake shielded the dragons and pushed them forward. They kept moving until the shaking stopped. When they finally reached the end of the tunnel, they crawled out into a narrow canyon. Jake's heart was pounding. He turned and saw smoke rising in the distance. The stable was gone, burned to ash in a single strike. The Seekers hadn't just found them. They were sending a message. Run all you want, we will find you. The dragons stayed low. Jake led them to an old water station hidden between cliffs. It hadn't been used in years, but he had kept it clean. They rested there, catching their breath. Jake tried to stay calm, but the little dragon's question broke the silence. Why did they want us so badly? Sari answered for both of them. It's not just us. It's what we can become. Jake asked what she meant. Sari hesitated, then explained. There's something ancient inside us. A power that only wakes up when we bond with others, when we trust deeply. Our kind learned long ago that humans are special. Their hearts, their choices, they create strong bonds. The Seekers fear this, because when a dragon and a human truly connect, something impossible happens. Jake didn't understand all of it, but he knew one thing: they weren't just running for their lives. They were running from something that didn't want peace. The Seekers wanted to erase the chance of connection. They wanted control. That night, as Jake lay under the stars with the dragons close by, he thought of the stable, now gone. He thought of the ranch he had built with his own hands. All of it turned to smoke. And yet, somehow, he didn't feel empty. He felt ready. If the Seekers wanted a fight, they'd get one. But this time, Jake wouldn't just be fighting for his land. He'd be fighting for something far greater. He looked over at the little dragon. She was curled up beside him, eyes closed, a soft glow returning to her body. She had almost died. But now she was stronger. They all were. And Jake knew something the Seekers didn't. You can burn a man's house. You can chase him through the dirt. But if he has something to protect, you'll never stop him. The secret bond between man and dragon. Jake woke up before the sun rose. The sky was still dark, the stars fading slowly. The desert air felt colder than usual, but the warmth beside him was comforting. The little dragon had pressed herself close during the night as if trying to protect him. Or maybe it was the other way around. He wasn't sure anymore. Something was changing. He didn't feel like the same man who once lived alone on a quiet ranch. There was something different in his heart now, something stronger. He looked at the dragon, and she opened her eyes at the same moment, as if she had heard his thoughts. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The silence between them said more than words. Later that day, Sari finally told Jake what she had feared to say earlier. The bond had begun. She said it started when he climbed the cliff to save her sister. The moment he risked everything, not for glory, not for reward, but for love. That's when the connection took root. A bond between a dragon and a human was rare, ancient, powerful. It could not be forced. It could only grow from trust. Jake listened in silence as Sari spoke. She said that when the bond reaches its peak, their hearts would beat in rhythm. They would feel each other's pain, each other's joy, even thoughts, if strong enough. She warned him it would come with a cost. Once fully bonded, he would never be the same. He would never live a normal human life again. The bond would change him, not just his mind, but his body too. He might become something new. Jake looked at her and asked a simple question. Would it make me strong enough to protect her? Sari nodded. Jake didn't hesitate. Then I accept it. Sari didn't smile, but her eyes softened. She guided him to a quiet part of the canyon where the wind was still. The younger dragon followed, her steps slow but steady. She sat beside Jake, looked into his eyes, and placed one of her claws gently on his chest. A light began to glow between them. Soft at first, then brighter, until it surrounded them both. Jake felt heat rise through his body, not painful, but powerful. Memories passed through his mind. The pain of losing his wife, the silence of lonely days, the sound of her laughter he missed so much. Then new images of the dragon beside him. Her eyes, her fear, her strength. And then a voice not spoken, but inside his mind. You are not alone anymore. The light faded. Jake fell back, breathing hard, but he didn't feel weak. He felt alive, more than ever before. His heartbeat was faster, but steady. His sight was sharper. He could hear the wind carry whispers. He could feel the dragons feel their fear, their warmth, their trust. Sari looked at him and said quietly, "The bond is complete." Jake didn't know what to say, but inside, he knew he wasn't just protecting them anymore. They were protecting him too. He was no longer just a rancher. He had become something else, something older than he could imagine. That night, the little dragon curled beside him again. But this time, Jake didn't sleep. His mind was awake, his heart open. He could feel her dreams. He could feel her heartbeat matching his. He saw flashes of her world, floating mountains, rivers of light, skies full of flying dragons. He also saw what had been lost flames, metal ships, screams, and he knew the seekers would return, stronger than before. But now, Jake wasn't just a target. He was a guardian. The bond between them was rare, maybe even the last of its kind. The seekers would do anything to break it. But Jake had already decided he would die before he let that happen. The days of hiding were almost over. The fight was coming, and Jake was no longer afraid. The last stand at the ranch. The desert winds had changed. They didn't whisper anymore, they screamed. Even the skies looked heavier, filled with a strange red glow that hadn't been there before. The bond was complete, and Jake could feel it deep in his chest. His heart beat differently now, in rhythm with the little dragon. When she was near, he felt steady. When she smiled, the pain in his body faded. But peace wasn't going to last. The time to run had ended. Jake made a choice. He would return. The ranch was ashes, but the land was still his. That was where the Seekers first struck, and that's where he would fight back. He didn't have weapons like theirs, but he had something more powerful, a bond no machine could copy. He packed food, supplies, and tools. The dragons followed without question. Even the younger one, still recovering, walked with new strength. Her eyes were bright. She knew this wasn't just Jake's fight anymore. It was theirs. They reached the ranch before sunset. Only blackwood and burned fences remained. The ground was scarred, like claws had ripped it apart. But the land still remembered Jake's touch. He stood tall in the middle of the ruins, his boots pressing into the dirt. He closed his eyes. He could feel the wind, the warmth of the dragons. And something else, like the earth itself, was listening. Jake began to rebuild not the buildings, but the land's defense. He placed heat traps in the soil, set mirrors in the sand to confuse sensors, and dug shallow pits. With Sari's help, he shaped stones and buried energy crystals the dragons had hidden in the desert long ago. They weren't bombs, but they could bend light, create illusions, hide the truth. Then he waited. And they came. Just as the sun fell behind the hills, a sound filled the sky, cold, sharp, unnatural. 3 black ships appeared overhead, shaped like knives. Their lights scanned the ground. Jake stood in the open, his body calm, his eyes steady. He wasn't hiding this time. The dragons stayed behind the ridge. They trusted him. They believed in the bond. The ships hovered, then dropped 3 Seekers onto the ground. They were tall, smooth silver. No faces, no voices. Just machines built to hunt. One of them stepped forward. Jake didn't move. The machine raised a weapon, but then stopped. Something in Jake's eyes made it pause. Maybe it was the bond. Maybe it was the fire in his heart. Jake spoke. "You want them? You'll have to take me first." The machines moved fast, but Jake was faster now. The bond had changed him. He dodged the first shot, rolled across the dirt, and pressed a switch buried in the ground. The mirror. Traps lit up, lights flashed. The machines turned toward false images, ghosts of dragons running in different directions. Jake used the distraction to strike. He slammed a heavy pole into the back of the closest Seeker, knocking it into a pit. The ground exploded with light as a crystal burst, disabling its sensors. The second machine turned, but Sari flew in from the side, silent and fast. She didn't breathe fire, but she used speed and shadow to confuse the target. Jake joined her. Man and dragon fought together, moving as one. He didn't need to speak. She already knew what he would do next. The third Seeker was stronger. It adapted. It ignored the traps. It charged toward the little dragon, who stood alone near a broken post. She was small, but she didn't run. Jake saw her stand tall, wings spread, eyes bright. The Seeker raised its arm. Jake didn't think. He ran. The bond pulsed in his chest like thunder. He placed himself between her and the blast. The light hit him, but something strange happened. It didn't burn. Instead, the bond flared and a shield of light surrounded them both. The beam stopped in midair. The Seeker froze. Then the little dragon opened her mouth, and for the first time, fire came out, not wild and violent, but focused and bright. The Seeker melted into the ground. Silence returned. All 3 were down. Jake fell to his knees, breathing hard. Sari landed beside him. The younger dragon curled around his legs. The battle was over. The ranch was still in ruins. But now it was more than land. It was a battleground where machines fell and families stood. Jake looked at the sky. He didn't know if more were coming. But he was ready, because now he wasn't fighting alone. The ranch becomes a sanctuary. Night after the battle was the quietest Jake had ever known. No wind, no machines, no fear. Just stars shining above the broken land and two small dragons sleeping beside him. He was bruised and tired, but alive. His chest still glowed faintly where the bond had saved him. That light hadn't faded since the moment he shielded the younger dragon. It pulsed now like a heartbeat, not just his own, but theirs, connected. For a long time, Jake didn't move. He sat in the dirt, staring at the sky, wondering what would come next. He had won a fight, but not the war. The Seekers might return, stronger, smarter, but they didn't win tonight. And if they came again, they'd face something they couldn't understand. A man, a dragon. A family died at sunrise. The younger dragon woke first. She crawled onto his lap and looked up at him with soft, glowing eyes. Jake smiled. Her scales were brighter than ever. The sickness was gone. The fear, too. She wasn't a lost creature anymore. She was home. Sari stood at a distance, watching the horizon. She said the Seekers might not return right away. They needed to report their failure. They would wait. But more would come, eventually. There would always be danger for dragons who bonded with humans. Jake nodded. But his answer surprised her. Then, we'll build something they can't break. He didn't mean weapons, not walls, not traps. Something bigger. He began rebuilding the ranch, not as it was, but as something new. A safe place. Not just for these two dragons, but for others who might be out there, hurt, alone, running. A sanctuary. The stable was the first to rise again. Not with machines or money, but with Jake's hands and the dragon's help. They worked together each day. Jake carried wood and hammered nails. Sari lifted heavy beams with her wings. The little one shaped the ground with her breath, smoothing the floor like soft glass. In just 2 weeks, the stable looked stronger than ever, warm, wide, and open. Jake placed symbols on the front door. Not human letters, but dragon runes. Sari told him what they meant. Peace lives here. Protection for all. One evening, they lit a fire outside. The dragons curled up beside it. Jake told them stories about Earth, about horses, rain, music, and laughter. The little one asked if she could hear real music. Jake promised her someday he'd find a way to play her a song. But before that could happen, something unexpected did. A signal. Faint, quiet, but real. Sari heard it first. A soft humming, like a voice whispering through the wind. She closed her eyes and listened. Her face changed. There are others. Jake looked up. Sari explained that far beyond the desert, across the mountains, there were other dragons, hiding, lost, afraid to trust, but they had felt the bond. They had felt safety. And they were listening now. Jake stood up. Can we call them here? Sari nodded. That night, she sent out a call. Not through machines, not with light or sound, but through the bond. A pulse that reached across the stars. A message simple and strong. You are not alone. Come home. The days that followed were quiet. Again. But something was different. Jake no longer felt like a man waiting to be attacked. He felt like a man waiting for guests. And then they came. One by one. Small shadows in the sky. Footsteps in the sand. Soft roars at night. Dragons of different shapes, colors, and sizes, tired, hurt, silent. But when they reached the ranch and saw the door, they paused. They felt it too, the safety. The warmth. Jake met each one at the gate. He didn't ask questions. He simply smiled and said, "You're safe here." Some stayed. Some rested and left. But word spread. Across empty lands and broken worlds, whispers of a sanctuary grew. A place where dragons and humans could live without fear. Not a legend. A truth. Jake never asked for this. He never planned it, but when the first dragon called him Father, he knew something had changed forever. He was no longer a lonely rancher. He was the guardian of Something sacred. And even if the seekers returned in greater numbers, they would never take that away, because they would never understand what made this place strong. It wasn't weapons. It wasn't fire. It was love.